there all right? Thank you for coming out. It's a gorgeous November morning. I'm not sure what it'll be like at 5 o'clock tonight, but they're talking snow. So we may have hit the end of our Indian summer, and I think it was yesterday and this morning. So thanks for coming out. Be sure you get coffee and donuts. We're fortunate to have Joan Graham today. She's going to talk about some books she's written called Minnesota Memories. She told me this morning that she is just back in Albert Lea from Maryland. And at this time, she was living in Maryland last year, and the sniper was in her neighborhood that everybody's been reading about. So she suggests that life in Albert Lea, Minnesota is a lot tamer than it was in Maryland. And with that, I give you Joan Graham. Joan, thank you.
I'm a teacher, a retired teacher, and for some reason getting stuck behind the microphone, it makes me feel like I'm all, kind of in a jail cell or something. So I think I can make it work. If it isn't working for you, if you aren't hearing from where you are, I don't know, wave your hands or stand up and say, I protest, or something. And I'll tether myself up behind the podium there, and I'll make it work, whatever. As my host just indicated, I was born in Albert Lea, Minnesota, many years ago. I graduated from high school in Albert Lea in 1964, and I pretty much hightailed it out of town. I started college in Winona about 10 days after high school graduation. I went summers and winters, finished in 3 years. I just needed to get out of that town. As many people are aware, Albert Lea has gone through a lot of evolution since 1964. The packing house, which used to belch out noxious fumes constantly, is now a pile of noxious sand, I guess. It burned down, they knocked it down. Now the hazmat guys are trying to figure out what to do with those piles and piles of toxic stuff that are left over after the wrecking crew came in. It's incredible when you drive into town and you look to a place that employed hundreds and thousands of people throughout many, many years, and you see the lake and nothing else. A lot of other things have changed in that town since I left. But as my host said, I'm very happy to be back there. After living in a rat race, I lived out in Los Angeles for about 15 years, and then I lived right in the shadow of Washington, D.C. for another 5 years. After college, I lived in Minneapolis for about 20 years. So Albert Lea is so laid back, and people are concerned about, we've got to make this town grow more. We need to increase the size of Albert Lea. No, let it be. Leave it alone. It's a comfortable place. It's a beautiful place. Miles and miles of lakeshore property. And there might be, 10 stoplights in town, and affordability, nice people, and I'm very glad to be back. One of the reasons I'm glad to be back is it's much easier for me to operate my mission/business out of Minnesota base. A few years ago, I was teaching English in Maryland, Montgomery County, Maryland, and across the hall from me was a woman from Owatonna. We never knew each other when we were growing up, but we would start talking during our breaks, trying to get away from it all, taking a break from what's going on in high schools today. Don't get me started on that. And sometimes we'd start talking about the people we used to know, the places we used to go, and experiences that we had back in good old Minnesota. And sometimes we'd get to laughing so hard that people would walk by and they'd think we had cracked up. And one day I was telling a story about something, I don't remember which one, and Kathy was laughing. She's one of those people, when she laughs, she jiggles and kind of makes the whole room start going. And she said, Joan, your stories are so good, you should send them in. She said, look, I sent in a story to the Chicken Soup for the Soul people, and they paid me $300, and she was dancing around. Woo! And I looked at the contract that she signed, and I saw that the Chicken Soup for the Soul people make you sign a contract that says they can shorten your story, they can lengthen your story, they can embellish your story, And I said, gee, you know, I like to think that after this many years of teaching English and journalism, I know how to put a story together. It kind of bugs me that these guys want to control my stories. I said somebody should write a book of stories about Minnesotans. Go around and gather stories from people. And we talked about it. Yeah, that would be neat. And then we realized that nobody else was going to do it. For one thing, a big publisher like Simon & Schuster or whatever, they're not going to concentrate on a little market like Minnesota. If those guys are going to stand behind a book, they're going to stand behind a book that they think is going to make a ton of money. What kinds of books about Minnesota make a ton of money? The books that make fun of Minnesotans. The books that make us seem like we all say, yeah, you know, you betcha. And we eat hot dish, breakfast, lunch, and supper. We talk funny. And when someone talks to us, they should probably talk very slowly because we're not too bright. That is the perception out there. I went to a play one time in San Francisco, and the woman sitting next to me said, where are you from? And I said, Minneapolis. And she said, oh, well then this must really be a treat for you. So, based on what's out there about Minnesota, people who live in other places think strange things about Minnesota people. Strange things that are not true. Rose on the Golden Girls was the dim bulb of the group. That is the characters in Fargo. Yeah, we're just like them. We are, right. When you look at achievement scores, look up on the list for Minnesota. When you look at what we have accomplished, what we have invented, the Mayo Clinic, many, many other significant contributions to American culture, a couple of recent vice presidents, you know, I could go on and on. You could fill in the blanks. We are smart, we laugh a lot, we have a lot of fun. That's just because, I don't know, there's a kind of a good nature that is pervasive in this part of the world. So my idea was to gather a bunch of stories from people, tell them to just tell any kind of story. It could be a historical story, it could be a story about your heritage, it could be a humorous story, it could be something to pay homage to someone, it could be a story about heroism or hard work. You notice all these words start with H. I had to do it that way, otherwise I'd never remember them when I go out on my gigs. History, heritage, hard work, heroism, homage, whatever, however you say it. Anyway, I put out a call to a lot of people that I used to know in Minnesota, and I said, send me a true story. If you went to a party and they were telling stories, send me the story that you tell. Everybody's got at least one really good killer story. Might be funny, might be scary, might be remarkable that you survived, might be a story of good luck. But everybody's got one, or some people know people that have many stories. And my friends said, oh yeah, sure, we'll send you a story. But you know how it is with friends. If you're not the, the IRS or somebody, they're not going to meet a deadline that a friend sends. If I say send it, so a few stories trickled in, and I said to my friend Kathy from Owatown, I said, let's go ahead with this book anyway. So we put the book together. About half that first book was stories that I wrote, but that wasn't the way I envisioned the whole mission. And so I went out with that first book, and I traveled 10,000 miles around Minnesota. I talked on radio stations, I talked at historical societies and libraries and bookstores and newspapers and anybody that would listen to me. And I said, I am the purveyor of memories for the typical Minnesotan. I speak for the typical Minnesotan. Send me your story, your best true story. I will treat it with kid gloves. I will treat it with respect. I will not make fun unless you want it to be fun. And we will put these books together in volumes called Minnesota Memories. And we will give ordinary people a chance to become part of recorded Minnesota history. If you look on the web for famous Minnesotans, you'll see all the big shots listed there. Lots has been written about them. But what about your grandmother who came over from Sweden with the clothes on her back? And what about the guy down the street who rescued a motorist who was the hero, was the first on the scene? What about these people? Their stories deserve to be preserved too. So because of my 10,000-mile trek around Minnesota, I got a lot of stories for Volume 2. So Volume 2 contains stories from 34 different people, in addition to myself. And Volume 3 contains stories from 33 people, in addition to myself. And Volume 4 is on my computer right now. It's going to be coming out in the spring, and I still have room for a few more stories. So if anybody gets an idea here today, I know what would be a good one. I really would love to get stories from you. And if there isn't room in Volume 4, wait for Volume 5. Imagine how you feel when the book comes out and you can take it to your grandchildren and say, look here, in addition to my other accomplishments, I am now a published writer. I don't think there are very many big shots. I guess the biggest shot who has contributed would be the governor. Governor Palenti gave me his inaugural address. And in his inaugural address, he said, my father-in-law just died, and my mother and father died some time ago, and we need to preserve the stories of the generation that is passing before us. We need to preserve their stories. And I saw that, and I said, hey, that's exactly what I'm trying to do. Can I put this in the book? And he said, sure. And so then he invited a bunch of the writers over to the Capitol, and he shook hands and acted like a politician for a while. But it was a very nice gesture. Well, I think some of these stories need to be read. So you need to know what it is that I'm talking about. And I can see that everybody's already awake today, but I'll read you my most requested story. And it's not very historically rich, but it's fun. It's a ton of fun. And it's called Toyota City. It's by me. Toyota City by Joan Claire Graham. Having lived in various parts of the country, I am always impressed by the patience and courtesy shown by my fellow Minnesotans. A situation that would evoke rude displays of impatience or sarcasm in California, New York, or the District of Columbia is most likely to be handled with down-to-earth courtesy and respect by the residents of the North Star State. No situation exemplifies this theory more than what I consider to be one of my most embarrassing encounters with a man from a retail establishment. As my daughter Susanna approached her second birthday in 1981, I searched for the perfect gift. She was old enough to appreciate a special surprise, but as a second child, she had already inherited all her sister's toys. She didn't actually need anything new, but I'm a firm believer in making children's birthdays magical and memorable. Although our house looked like a testing grounds for Toys R Us, we had never purchased a coaster wagon. So that's what I decided to buy Susanna for her second birthday. Since it was mid-August, many stores were clearing out their wheel toys to make room for sleds and skates. Consequently, I was happy and relieved to find one remaining wagon, the kind with the wooden sides, on sale at Target. Because it was a floor model, the red and beige beauty was already assembled, which I considered to be a stroke of luck. As I pulled the wagon up to the cashier, however, the right rear wheel came off the axle and rolled down the aisle. Although I retrieved the wheel and tried to find the missing part, I could not find that little red cap that holds the wheel onto the axle. A helpful manager told me that the part had probably been missing for quite some time. He said Target doesn't stock wagon parts, but he suggested I try other stores. For some reason, I decided then and there to refer to that missing part as a hubcap. Oh well, I thought, Susanna's only 2 years old. She probably won't even notice it's missing, and by the time she does notice, I will have somehow replaced the hubcap. I brought the wagon home and loaded it with smaller gifts sent by friends and family. What a beautiful sight it was. Susanna was delighted when she came down the stairs the next morning, and she spent some time giving the cats rides around the house. As miraculous as it seems, the wheel stayed in place, despite the missing hubcap. Of course, Susanna decided she wanted to take her new toy out for a spin, which seemed like a reasonable request for the birthday girl to make. Susanna looked like a little princess, sitting in her pretty wagon, wearing her birthday dress, holding her new stuffed dog, and waving to her little friends as I pulled her along the shaded sidewalk that perfect August morning in Robbinsdale. But as we approached the sidewalk ramp to cross 38th, the right rear wheel slid off the axle and rolled down the street. I parked the wagon, shagged the wheel, and pushed it as far onto the axle as it would go. Although I walked slowly and hoped the incident would not recur, my hopes were dashed every 50 yards or so. We had to cut the birthday parade short when the wheel got loose a fifth time and was almost crushed by a car. Susanna was very disappointed. When we returned from the walk, I pointed out the missing hubcap and promised Susanna I would get a new one as soon as possible. In the meantime, we would play it safe and restrict wagon use to the playroom. In the concerned flurry of a mother on a mission to please her birthday girl, I checked the phone book. Where would I start, I wondered? Hardware stores, toy stores. In those days, the businesses were listed in the white pages along with the residential numbers. And under the T, I found what I thought would be the perfect listing. Toy City. With a name like that, I figured they must either have the part in stock or know where I could find it. Grabbing the phone with one hand, I put my finger under the listed number and dialed as quickly as possible. The problem was that in my frenzied state, my fingers slipped a little, and I dialed the next number in the listing, which was Toyota City. A shot of static drowned out the voice of the person who answered the phone. I heard toy and I heard city, and I had no reason to suspect I had dialed the wrong number. My daughter received a wagon for her birthday, and we've been having a problem with it, I began. I'll connect you with the service department, friendly sounding woman said. Wow, I thought. Some toy store. They have a service department. How did I get so lucky on my first try? This is Al. How can I help you? Came a man's voice over the phone. My daughter received a wagon for her birthday, and we've been having a problem with it, I began. What seems to be the problem? Asked Al. Well, I replied, one of the hubcaps is missing and the wheel keeps falling off. Ma'am, Al explained patiently, a missing hubcap does not cause a wheel to fall off. Sure it does, I explained. None of the other wheels falls off. Every time the wheel falls off, I have to chase down the street to get it back, and my daughter is very disappointed. This got Al's attention. You've been chasing wheels down the street? He asked. Yes, I said. I have to. I know it's probably not life-threatening because when one wheel falls off, we still have 3 wheels to roll on. But it's very inconvenient to be losing that 4th wheel all the time, and it takes the joy out of the trip. I could tell by Al's tone of voice he was perplexed and concerned. What are you usually doing just before the wheel falls off? Well, it almost always happens when we drive off curbs, but it also has happened on the straightaway. Driving off curbs? Asked Al. Why are you driving off curbs? We have to, I explained. It's the only way we can get where we want to go. In my mind, I was wondering why Al was being so dim-witted. I can only imagine now what Al was thinking about me. This is very strange, he observed. The presence or absence of a hubcap has nothing to do with the stability of the wheel on the axle. Figuring Al was hopelessly and irretrievably dense, I decided to skip ahead and ask for the wagon part I needed. Can you at least sell me a new hubcap or tell me where I can buy a new one? Sure, said Al, still sounding like the perfect gentleman. What kind of wagon is it? A radio flyer, I answered. After a slight pause, Al replied, We don't service those here. This is Toyota City. I rolled my eyes back and felt the blood rush to my head as I started to physically and psychologically experience the utter embarrassment caused by the stupidity of this conversation. Okay, thanks, I managed as I hung up the phone and started to look for the nearest dunce cap. Accepting my humiliation, I phoned Toy City and I got the address of the radio flyer company, which sent me a little red hubcap in a padded envelope a few days later. I said nothing about my conversation with Al until one day when the absurdity of it came back to me in a wave that triggered nonstop laughter until my family started considering calling the men in white coats to take me away. When I was finally able to retell the tale, they shared my laughter until tears rolled down everyone's cheeks. I can imagine that a similarly hilarious retelling had already taken place over at Al's house and down at Toyota City. What made this incident such a treasured comical memory was that Al behaved like such a perfect gentleman throughout this absurd conversation. What a champ! Good comedy requires a good straight man, and Al's natural instincts framed the incident to perfection. Al, wherever you are, I hope you did well at Toyota City, that they named you Employee of the Year, and that the guys in the service department enjoyed your retelling of your phone conversation with the crazy woman from Robbinsdale that day in 1981. And it's all true. The thing about writing a story from your own life is that you're not allowed to do those little tweaks and things that fiction writers can do. I find sometimes when I'm watching a sitcom or something, it's so contrived, you know, what people say. There's almost like a rhythm. Line, line, laugh, line, line, laugh. And real life, when you get into a conversation with a bunch of good-humored, good-hearted people, real conversation, it can be just so much more fun than that, and so much funnier, really, don't you think? And because it's the unexpected, it's not line, line, laugh. You can be going along for a whole long time, and then all of a sudden somebody says something, you know, that just pushes your buttons. So this is why I'm really concerned with preserving these true stories. But not all the true stories that I get are funny. Some of the true stories are historically rich. Some of the true stories are tragic, but they all kind of have that common thread of course, the Minnesota perspective on things. Let me find you another one here. Here's one that I'm sure a lot of people in this room can relate to. It's kind of a historical story. It's by a fellow named Steve Swanson, who is a minister in Northfield. And the story is called Trading Stamps and the Road to Redemption. Merchants had never found a gimmick half so powerful. Trading stamps. Gold Bond, one of the most successful and popular trading stamps, was founded by Minnesota's own Kurt Carlson. With a $55 loan from his landlord, Carlson started a business that evolved into a multi-billion-dollar empire. Most of us didn't pay much attention to Carlson's empire, but we became obsessed with trading stamps. Carlson enlisted Anfinn Odland's grocery store in South Minneapolis as the first business to offer gold bond stamps in 1938. Customers who received 10 stamps for each dollar spent pasted stamps into a little book and redeemed a full book for $3. Books contained 24 pages that held 50 stamps, so a filled book represented an expenditure of $120. During the Depression, a $3 rebate was a great incentive to shop at Odland's. The Gold Bond Company grew steadily until 1953 when Carlson landed the Super Value account. In 9 months, the stamps boosted Super Value's sales by 63%. With working capital at last, and at the urging of Super Value, Carlson made a line of premiums available to stamp savers through mail-order catalogs and at redemption centers. Trading stamp frenzy ensued. Some stores gave green stamps, others gave gold bond, gift bond, or other kinds. Erickson's gas station gave stamps redeemable for dishes displayed in showcases right at the pumps. Raleigh Cigarettes printed stamps on packs, and a smoker with a cough made a morose joke about redeeming Raleigh stamps for an iron lung. Betty Crocker put a slight twist on the Stamp Act with coupons redeemable for flatware and cookbooks. Everyone saved stamps. I remember a blasphemous cartoon at the time, Jesus Saves, gold bond stamps. The Smothers Brothers sang a parody of Greensleeves called Green Stamps. Stamps became a ubiquitous part of popular culture. Smaller and more plentiful than postage stamps, trading stamps came in both sheets and strips. A large supermarket purchase could net the shopper a 2-foot streamer of stamps from a thumb-operated machine by the register. On boring nights, shoppers could lick themselves spitless, pasting stamps carefully, mind the printed grid, into passport-sized books. Green stamp books were Scotch plaid. Gold bond books featured Sandy Saver, a winking little cartoon Scotsman on the cover. Books which started neat but got fat and cumbersome as pages filled and glue stiffened were commonly kept by savers in shoeboxes. Redemption centers cropped up in department stores and offices where handsomely displayed premiums offered further incentives to save stamps. Premiums, ranging from the trivial to the huge, represented stuff the average shopper would like to have without spending money. Although merchants factored the cost of stamps into the price of merchandise, stores didn't usually offer a discount to shoppers who didn't want the stamps. Stamp savers perused catalogs at home so they could plan their visits to redemption centers. Pinking shears, toys, card tables, can openers, egg beaters, pans, baking dishes, and alarm clocks cost anywhere from a half book to 3 books. The most popular items in the Gold Bond redemption centers were steam irons, Hamilton wristwatches, sheets, and pillowcases. Friends sometimes swapped green stamps for Gold Bond stamps to maximize their redemption power. The most expensive item in Gold Bond's 1963 line was a Maytag washer for 109 books. If a shopper spent $13,080 at a store that gave stamps, she could redeem those stamps for a free washer. The average income was $5,600. A new car cost $2,300, and a gallon of gas costs a quarter. So 109 books of trading stamps took a lot of spending and a lot of spit. Rather than buy a Maytag washing machine for $200 and redeem the stamps from its purchase for an egg beater, a stamp saver could redeem all her stamps from the purchase of 5.5 new cars to get a washing machine. Stamps were the only acceptable currency at redemption centers. If a shopper came up a few stamps short, she was not allowed to supplement cash to get the desired item. Redemption center personnel checked and double-checked to make sure all books had 24 pages and all pages contained 50 stamps. Books could be traded in whole or ripped into quarters or halves because some items cost 3.5 books or 9 3/4 books. By 1960, Gold Bond employed 700 and ran 200 stores and grossed $50 million. By 1966, their peak year, they did $200 million worth of business. During this frenzy, when every business gave some kind of trading stamps and thousands of Minnesota families spent countless hours licking, sticking, planning, and redeeming, the bottom fell out of the trading stamp business. One savvy store lured customers by offering lower prices without stamps, and within a few years, trading stamps became passé. The whole trading stamp phenomenon looks like one of John Calvin's 15th century sermon illustrations. Irresistible grace, a valuable little book, free gifts, redemption centers. Stamps were rewarded like Sunday school attendance stickers or grade school gold stars. Trading stamps paved the way for other customer loyalty incentives like frequent flyer miles and grocery discount cards. My wife tells me that we still have a 40-year-old French casserole and a Stanley thermos bottle that we redeem stamps to get. She thinks some businesses still give stamps. With today's inflation, stamps must be cumbersome. Imagine a person licking herself or himself dead dry after buying new kitchen appliances, hors d'oeuvres for a wedding, or a computer. I suppose stamps today are self-adhesive, but it doesn't seem that saving them like we once did would fit into today's lifestyle.
We lived in Waterloo, and our neighbor, who was one of my good friends, I made a friend with me, that lived in the box that our house came in. I mean, they were really poor. And we both saved stamps, and when we went to the Redemption Center, me being the conscientious, wonderful wife, took a frying pan.
Yeah.
She took a string of pearls. And I thought all the way home, what's the matter with her? And then what was the matter with her was she knew how to live. She was happy.
I love it. I love it. That's the story for the next book. Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned about how many stamps it took to get a wash machine. Did anybody ever get a wash machine?
I think what a lot of places did, sometimes charitable organizations would ask people to donate their books of stamps so they could get some of these big things. I know that later on they even offered cars or vans, and so instead of people giving money, they could donate their. I mean, I can't imagine how many stamp books it would take to redeem for a van or something, but I understand that it's doable. I know, like the Campbell Soup Company today has kids cut the soup labels off the cans. Maybe as grandparents, some of you have gotten involved in that. And it's just amazing, you get this mountain, you get this room full of soup labels, and you look in the catalog and say, well, gosh, I can still only get a tape recorder. So I can't imagine how many it would take to get something really, really big. If you've ever been involved in a fundraiser that involves the bartering of stamps like that. But the thing that amazed me was if $120 got you a book that's worth $3, so that's like, that's less than a 3% rebate. If you went into a store and they said, sale, 3% off, you'd sail right on by. I mean, it's not even worth figuring out. I guess maybe during the Depression days it was. But it's kind of how retailers sort of fooled you into thinking you were getting something for nothing.
Of course, now they have coupons. Coupons can be cumbersome too.
That's right, they can, right? But at least with a coupon, you know exactly what you usually get them with the newspaper, which you'd get anyway, or they send them to you for free. And so I think coupons are really a better deal than the stamps, don't you?
You didn't have to get any insight into how the Redemption Center got rid of the books that they collected, because you'd have to pick them up in an armored car or something.
I don't know. I think back in those days they still didn't have burning bans in most cities. That's probably what happened. They'd be afraid somebody else would get hold of them. Suppose they burned them. I mean, they weren't good for anything.
They often took black markers.
Oh, did they?
When they checked them out, they ran them right through the
Did
paper.
they?
You weren't offered 2% off, or you weren't offered
That's right.
coupons.
That's
So
right.
It was a way to get something we couldn't afford.
It was, yeah. Oh, I can remember the Redemption Center at Skinner Chamberlain and Albert Lee, and it was serious business. I mean, it was dream time. You'd see those nice watches in the boxes. My mother got me a travel alarm clock. It all folded into a nice little leatherette case, and it lasted for about 2 years. And I don't know how many books it was. It was kind of pricey, because it was beautiful looking.
Dave mentioned the stamps that you get at Subway Subs, where you can redeem 12 stamps for half a sandwich.
Oh, you can?
It's a better return, but it's
Yeah.
the stamps.
Yeah. When I was in college, I belonged to Bridgman's Ice Cream Club, where you brought in a card, and every time you bought an ice cream cone, they stamped it. And I was serious about that. I don't know, you had to have like 20 ice cream cones before you got a free one, but that free one tasted so much better than those 20 had. It was the best. Yes.
I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about how you got a publisher to publish your first book.
Well, that is interesting. I didn't get a publisher to publish a first book, even though I thought the book was very entertaining and certainly better than many things out there. Since my name isn't Prince William or Derek Jeter or, you know, somebody with instant name recognition or Tom Clancy, I sent my book out to many publishers and they sent it right back. The worst response I got was people ignoring me. The best response I got was from one publisher who said, well, I can't really do it this year, but come back in a couple or 3 years. And I said, you know, I don't want to come back in 2 or 3 years. Maybe by then somebody else will think of it and they'll be off and running. I want to do this, you know. I have deferred everything I've wanted to do all my life. You can't do this until the kids are in school. And then once the kids are in school, you can't do this until they grow up. And once they grow up, you can't do it until they finish college. And you can't do it until the mortgage is, you can't you know, you're always, you can't do something you want because you're having to do something you have to do. I said, you know, I just did the, 55-year-old equivalent of a tantrum. I want to do this. I want to do this. And so I contacted Janet Martin over in Hastings, who puts out those Growing Up Lutheran books. She's got a whole series of books. And I said, how do you do it? And she said, I publish them myself. And I said, well, how would I do that? And she said, well, you become a publishing company and you just publish it yourself. Well, I've been a high school newspaper advisor, so I'm very computer savvy, and I know how to run PageMaker, which is a publishing program. So I had some computer skills. And I got a book called How to Publish Your Own Book, and I formed a publishing company, and I solicited the stories, I formatted the whole book. Everything gets put on a zip disk, which gets taken to a printer. I have to apply for an ISBN, otherwise most stores don't want to handle it. You have to just learn how to do that, and each time you set out to do something like that, there are obstacles you have to overcome. I saw this kid on the Today Show yesterday morning. Maybe some of you saw. This kid was taught by Drew Bledsoe's mother, is an English teacher up in Walla Walla, Washington. And this kid had her for an 8th grade teacher, and he was kind of what many people would consider a real loser. You know, he really didn't have much going for him. And she encouraged him. And then when he gets into high school, he encounters Drew Bledsoe's father, who was an English teacher. And the father used to write a slogan on the board every day, you know, just kind of like a phrase, like a little saying of some kind. And some of these sayings that Drew Bledsoe's father wrote on the board really affected this kid. He dropped out of school, but he got back into the swing of things, got his degree eventually, and was thanking these people for positively affecting his life. But anyway, one of the sayings was something like, the water that you have to wade through might be cold and it might be deep, and you have to figure out whether or not getting to the other side is worth it. And I'm sure it was said much more succinctly and beautifully than that, but that's the general gist of the whole thing. Maybe some of you know the real quote. But many times I encountered obstacles. You know, nobody wanted to publish me. Well, and then I talked to Janet Martin, and she said, well, you can do it, but it is so difficult. And it's just like, I wanted to do it so much that, okay, if it's difficult, I'll figure it out. And I started out with my first load of books from Maryland. I had the blue one printed in Maryland. I drove to Minnesota. I went to the Bookman, which was a book distributor that used to be in Minneapolis, and I said, I've got this great regional title, and he said, wonderful. He said, we have a great market here for regional titles, and I had 2,500 books in the van, and I said, well, how many would you like? And he said, 60. 60? He said, well, we don't usually take that many, but we'll start out with 60. And I realized then and there that I had a really tough road ahead of me. So basically, I've been my own publicity person. I do a lot of radio, a lot of personal appearances. I just do everything myself because I was a teacher for 20-some years. More than that, probably closer to 30 years if you add all the places where I've lived and everything. This is the funnest job I've ever had. It is so rewarding. It is so much fun. Every day I get letters from people I don't even know, letters that contain their stories, and people that are trusting me with their stories. And it's just a hoot. It is so much fun. Here's a story from Odin, Minnesota by a woman named Tari Swenstad, and it's called I Forgot to Vote. Odin, a prairie town located in south central Minnesota near St. James, has a population of about 105. You wouldn't think a town like that could attract national attention, but we made national news twice in 20 years. If the name Odin sounds vaguely familiar, you may have heard it mentioned sometime between 1979 and 1981 when Iranians held hostage Americans from the embassy in Tehran. Bruce Langan, U.S. charge d'affaires in Iran, was one of the American diplomats taken hostage. And while they were held hostage, and when they were finally released, reporters talked about how Bruce had grown up on a farm near Odin. Those of us who knew him as a kid were proud and happy to join the millions who welcomed Bruce home. But that was not the first time our town made national news. The first time we made the headlines came as a result of the outcome of the election of 1960. Everyone knows that Kennedy defeated Nixon in a hotly contested, close, and controversial presidential bid. But what many people do not know is that in the town of Odin, Dwayne Winters defeated incumbent Henry Swenstad for the office of mayor. You might be wondering how news like this could possibly grab national attention. In a town like Odin, as you might expect, the office of mayor is not a full-time job. The mayor of Odin has neither the workload nor the salary paid to the mayor of New York, Chicago, or Los Angeles. He has no press secretary, no official residence, no entourage. He actually has no salary, aside from a small honorarium. The mayor of Odin needs to have a day job, but still, being mayor of Odin carries responsibilities, and whoever carries out the work of mayor is elected by the usual political process. You might still be wondering how our election got national coverage. My father-in-law, Henry Swenstad, had been mayor for several years when he was opposed by Dwayne Winters in the 1960 race. Henry, a carpenter, woke up the morning of the election and got so busy getting ready to drive down to Iowa with a work crew that he forgot to vote. When he returned home that night, the polls were closed, and he was surprised to learn that Dwayne had defeated him by 1 vote. Our local reporter, Ruth Hammer, thought this was an interesting story, so she sent it to the St. James Plain Dealer and the Mankato Free Press. Someone from the Associated Press picked it up, and newspapers across the nation ran the story as a filler. Scouts for the television show I've Got a Secret saw the news item and invited Henry to New York to appear on the show. At first, Henry refused. He had never been to New York, had never appeared on television, and had never flown on an airplane. He had no intention of appearing on that show, but family and friends convinced him to change his mind. My husband Donald took his dad to St. James to buy him a new suit, and we drove him to Wold Chamberlain Airport in Minneapolis and put him on the plane for his Wednesday night show appearance. When Henry arrived in New York, someone from CBS met him at the airport, and they rolled out the red carpet and put him up at a nice hotel. I've Got a Secret was a very popular show that was on the air for 15 years. The way the show worked was that a contestant came on and whispered a secret to host Gary Moore. At the same time, the words of the secret appeared across the bottom of the screen so the viewers at home could see it. A panel of 4 celebrities, who could not see the words, would take turns asking the contestant questions so they could guess his secret. The longer it took for the panel to guess, the more money the contestant made. Top prize was a couple of $100, twice the annual mayor's salary. The show usually featured 3 regular people and 1 celebrity with a secret. Most shows didn't have a theme, but this one did: the importance of each person's vote. Henry's secret that flashed across the screen when he whispered to host Gary Moore's ear was, "I lost the election by 1 vote, and I forgot to vote." Henry stumped the panel. Henry returned to Odin with a photo of himself with some celebrities who were on the show, Gary Moore and Helen Hayes. He was glad we had convinced him to accept the invitation to appear on the show, and we were all glad too, because we enjoyed our 15 minutes of fame almost as much as he did. The photo hangs today in the Odin Town Hall with pictures of other town events. What happened to the winner of the election? Nothing quite so exciting. He served as mayor for 8 years and never enjoyed as much attention as the man who lost the election. Haven't seen him for a while. I think it's still on that classic television station. I've been hoping to pick it up sometime in the middle of the night. They have those old black and white ones. But I haven't. Maybe I'll go sometime to the Museum of Broadcasting in New York City and see if I can find that episode with Helen Hayes and Henry Swenstad. Well, you see now, that's the kind of story that really deserves to stick around. And some of the stories that I have aren't quite that lighthearted, I mean. I have one story about the first Miss Minnesota who came from this area. Her name was Bernice Pennington, and her sister wrote a lovely tribute to Bernice about how she was the first Miss Minnesota, and it's a very, very sad story. She says, "I grew up on a farm north of Rochester along a quiet county road that is now Highway 52. As the youngest daughter in a family of 8 children, I looked to my oldest sister Bernice for guidance and companionship. Bernice found my name in a book she was reading and convinced my mother to name me Rosemary instead of Lucille. She was 12 years old when I was born, old enough to help Mother take care of a baby sister, and perhaps this special dependency helped create the bond that I still feel. She was an unusually lovely person, both in appearance and demeanor, and we were very close, despite our age difference. When Bernice was 17, some state fair officials who were visiting my father were so charmed by her beauty that they asked her to be the first Miss Minnesota. My parents discussed the invitation, and after much controversy, they finally agreed to allow Bernice to accept this opportunity. That fall, my parents and Bernice were honored guests at the State Fair in St. Paul. They sat in a grandstand box to watch festivities, and Bernice accepted a gift from the governor and flowers from the State Fair officials. She enjoyed a grand tour of the Twin Cities. In those days, such adventures were unusual for a farm girl from Rochester. Bernice must have felt like Cinderella, and as the little sister, I shared her joy. After she graduated from high school the next year, Bernice entered Rochester Junior College. We shared a room, and I loved to have Bernice read me stories every night. Sometimes we studied and admired the brochures from Macalester College that she had sent for. Bernice wanted to attend Macalester after junior college. One November morning, our Aunt Della knocked on our bedroom door, and without a word, Bernice sprang out of bed and followed her downstairs. I ran to the other kids' bedrooms and told them what had happened, and we all came out to the hall and leaned over the stair railing. I remember saying, "I smell a doctor." An hour or so later, Aunt Delia asked us to come and see our new baby brother. As I entered the room and saw the white uniform of the nurse who had accompanied the doctor, I asked her where her wings were. I was sure she was an angel who had brought my baby brother from heaven. A few weeks after that, Bernice was taken to the hospital with a burst appendix. Although she survived, the doctors discovered that she had tuberculosis of the stomach. We drank unpasteurized milk at that time, and doctors now think that an infected cow can transmit tubercle bacillus through its milk. I'm not sure that's how she contracted the disease, but it's a possibility. Tuberculosis was the worst sentence that the doctors could have pronounced. Although some people recovered on their own, no medications were available to combat the disease. The disease almost invariably led to a slow and painful death. Because tuberculosis was thought to be very contagious to a new baby and to other children, there was no thought that Bernice could return home. She was sent to Mineral Springs Sanatorium in Cannon Falls, where she was put in a ward with patients who had tuberculosis of the lung and eventually her lungs also became infected. Bernice remained at Mineral Springs for 8 years, a virtual prisoner. We visited her every other Sunday, a difficult trip on a bad road during winter, and many times our car broke down along the way. Children were not allowed inside the sanatorium, so I was only able to talk to Bernice when she came to the third-floor window. The only therapy available in the 30s was fresh air and sunshine, so Bernice had to spend long hours in bed on the screened porch. She found it difficult to write letters because her hands were so cold. But she did manage to write regularly. We read her letters and then thoroughly washed our hands because the common belief was that TB was fiercely communicable. I think my mother had to burn the letters as a precaution against the disease. Bernice must have felt like a leper, unable to know the touch of loved ones and afraid she might transmit the disease to her siblings. Since she was an affectionate person, she must have been miserable from the lack of human contact. We know now that those severe precautions that prevented human contact for anyone with tuberculosis were unnecessary. And it still makes me tearful to think how my sister suffered. I am sure she would have gladly traded her few moments of glory as the first Miss Minnesota for a life as a healthy person. There is no happy ending to this story. Bernice died December 22nd, 1933 at age 25. My mother gave me a diary that Christmas, and for many years I wrote letters to Bernice in it. Her memory has influenced my life in so many ways. I kept her McAllister brochures after I graduated from college, from the college she had dreamed of attending. While there, I met my wonderful husband and father of my 5 children. Although I wish often that I could have shared the many joys and milestones of my life with Bernice over the years, I'm sure she was looking over my shoulder. And there's a picture of lovely Bernice. So there is another important Minnesota story. Now, I am willing to bet that from this crowd today, I will receive, maybe I've already received something from some of you, but I bet I will receive a story from somebody. Up here I have some pointers for telling or writing a story. If you don't write a story to send to me, write stories to preserve in your family. It would be nice, it would be a nice holiday tradition to say to some people in your family, instead of buying me more stuff, will you please send me one true story about something? And then compile all these stories in a nice book. The nicer the booklet that you keep it in, the less likely it is to get thrown out with the newspapers or something. So put these stories in a nice book, or take them to Kinko's or someplace and have them put it in a vellum binding or a spiral binding or something, and preserve those family stories. The reason is this: the junk we buy has a shelf life. The video game you buy your grandson is passé by next Christmas. The sweater is outgrown or not cool anymore or whatever. But the stories get more valuable as they get older. And as the people who are able to tell these stories start slipping away from us, the stories even gain more value. Ordinary people deserve to have their stories told. And many of us don't have to go back very far in our families before all we find are dates, when they were born, when they died, when their kids were born, when they were married. And those are matters of public record. As members of families, we deserve to know more. And so the only way we can know more, the only way we can avoid future generations speculating on what made us tick, we have to write something down. It's very daunting to write your whole life story, but write one story about something that happened or some important person you knew. And you know, it's like potato chips. One just leads to another. After you get one done and you see tangible proof that you can do it, then you think, oh, that reminds me of this, that reminds me of that. So even if you don't send a story to me for volume 4 or 5, write these stories down for your families. I have a book of tips here for a dozen tips for family biographers in case you don't know how to get started. If you enjoyed my presentation today and you belong to an organization that would like a speaker to go to your group, I've got these. I have business cards, and of course I have books. The sale of the books pretty much finances the production of further books. My dream, I think this is a pretty handsome looking set here, but my dream is to have a shelf full of these things. And these shelves full of stories of ordinary people. And these books sell on Amazon, they sell at Barnes & Noble here down the road, and B. Dalton's and all these places. The first one sells for $12.95, this is $13.95, and this is $13.95. The last two books are about a third bigger than the first one was. The first one was like my starter book, and the rest of them have blossomed a little bit more. But when I go out on talks like this, I offer people a deal. If you want to buy any of these books, 1, 2, or 3, I'll sell them to you for $11, and I'll pay the tax, or if you want to buy the whole set for $33. They make lovely gifts. You can almost guarantee that most of the people, most of those expatriates who move down to Brownsville or wherever they move, you know, Florida, Texas, wherever they go, when they bail out on Minnesota, you can almost bet they don't have them. They make lovely books and are lovely gifts, and appreciate the sales that I get. Each book, I publish 2,500 of each book. So I'm down to like my last, I don't know, a couple of hundred on the first volume. And it takes that long for me to sell that many, and some of those are sold to stores. So anyway, thank you very, very much for your kind attention and for your input. I love it when people back there say they can relate to it. You will find a total of about 130 stories in the 3 books, and I know you will just find lots and lots of things to chuckle about. And they're most fun when they're read aloud. So if you can find another old fart like yourself, sit there and take turns reading them aloud, you'll find yourselves giggling and enjoying, and somebody told me yesterday that they read these stories in the car driving to the lake or something. They were to keep her husband awake, read in the car. And each story is between 1 page and 10, so the short format is good for a lot of people who might not be well enough to tackle on a 1,100-page book or whatever. But anyway, thank you very much for your attention. Yes?
This next year is the sesquicentennial for Rochester.
Yes.
And we also have a writing contest.
Oh,
There's a
wow.
contest for adults to collect those stories. The prizes are savings bonds worth $150, $75, and $50. And it fits right into what you're talking about. We are trying to collect those. And if you watch in the newspaper and the NIE, the Neighborhood and Education section, you'll see the ground rules and stuff. I think you probably have copies of them out here. But it would fit very nicely, and all the stories will be gathered here so that if you came from Europe, for instance, after the war, you bring your story and we keep it out here for future generations to look at.
Well, the people who send me stories, they can send their stories to other places. I just basically have them sign a contract that says this is like one of the places where their work is published. And if other people don't mind that it's already been published here, what does the writer get out of it? The writer gets a book and a chance to buy books at a wholesale cost. The 6-year-old Honda out there with the dent in the side, that's mine, Not this at the Goodwill. I'm not, Danielle Steele. I don't have an empire here, but it's so much fun. I do it for free. I really would. Yes.
How does your husband put up with you being away? So does he go along with you?
Well, no. The husband isn't in the picture at this point. But we'll get into that. That's a whole.
That's a whole book.
Yeah.
Would you like to get copies of the winners?
Sure.
I'll get one of your cards, and we'll make sure that the winners from the local contest come to you so you can look at it.
Okay, great. Wonderful.
When
So,
did your first book hit the street?
my first book, well, I hope it never hits the street, but it hit the bookshelves July of 2001. So then all the bookstores that I went to said, oh, golly, you should really print them in the spring. And so the next one came out in May, and then the next one came out in April. So I'm kind of working my way back to they have these spring like trade shows that gift store owners, and they go and they pick out their merchandise and stuff like that. But this book really needs a cheerleader to make people aware of what it is, because it's not part of the Minnesota vernacular. You know, people, when you say Minnesota memories, people don't know what you mean. Like they know what you mean when you say chicken soup for the soul. But so I do a fair amount of selling. If I go out and show people what it's like, and then they buy them, they love them.
Hey, I think you'll hit the national sales level because these stories sound very good.
Well, thank you. We're going to get a quote from this man for the back of the next book. Thank you very much.
Joan, thank you very much. We really appreciate it. Before you all leave, I've got an announcement or two to make. Jane and Mary are going to be passing around a slip that we would like you to take a little thought to fill out. We would like to get a list of other speakers, other ideas that we can present to you in the upcoming months and the next year. So if you've got any ideas of things that you would like to hear about or people that you think we should hear from, would you write them down on Joan and Mary's list? They're coming around right now. Next month, December 10th, John Kaler, who was in the newspaper the other day, is going to talk about Rochester's early Wright brother, and I have no idea who that is. So I think come December, come on out to the Princess Cafe. You'll hear about, I am assuming, an early flyer from the Rochester area. That's December 10th. So get a hold of a copy of this. This is what it looks like for some future Princess Cafe speakers. Please note that the new calendar is out and in the rack up there. It just got put out this past week. So it's our 2004 calendar.